They say temptation doesn't always kick the door in wearing a warning sign. Sometimes it rolls a suitcase into your entryway with a polite smile. Sometimes it calls your husband, Uncle Mark, and asks you where to put his shoes. Sometimes it doesn't feel like thunder at all. It feels like a long, slow sigh you've been holding for years. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know. And if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? My name doesn't matter. Picture me however you want, late 30s, maybe early 40s, in that strange middle stretch of life where you're too old to be called young, but too young to feel as invisible as you do. I'm married. My husband's name is Mark. We've been together for 12 years, married for 9. From the outside, you'd call it fine. But we have a modest house, 2 functioning cars, holiday dinners with family, photos stuck to the fridge with magnets from beach trips and dentist offices. The usual checklist of a life that's technically working. Inside, something had been hollowed out, slowly and quietly, not by some dramatic betrayal. There was no huge fight, no slammed doors, no scenes in public. There was just fading, a color draining out one shade at a time. You don't notice when the first hue disappears, or the second, but one morning you open the curtains and realize everything is washed out, and you can't remember the last time it felt bright between you. Mark used to look at me, not just past me. When we were dating, he'd listen like every silly detail I shared was treasure. What my favorite song was that month, that my coffee had to have sugar before milk or it tasted wrong. The irrational fear I carried that I'd never told anyone else. We'd stay up too late, talking about everything and nothing. Back then, it felt like we could talk the night right into morning. Now, we could share a room for hours and not exchange more than a handful of functional sentences. What time is your meeting? Did you pay the gas bill? The sink is leaking again. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cheating. He was just elsewhere, in his work, in his phone, in his exhaustion. Some part of him had quietly stepped away from me without saying goodbye. And when his sister called and asked if her son could stay with us for the summer, I said yes before Mark even picked up the phone. It'd just be for a couple months, she said on speaker. You know how expensive it is to find a place near his internship. He can help out around the house. He's a good kid. I pictured him the way he'd been the last time I'd really noticed him, at Christmas a few years back. Tall but still all elbows, braces flashing, eyes glued to a game console, mumbled greetings, then disappearing into the world behind those noise-canceling headphones. His name was Leo. In my mind, he was still more boy than man. Yeah, of course, I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. He's family. We'll make it work. And Mark, still half turned toward the glow of his laptop, shrugged. Tell him he's welcome, he said. I'll clear some space in the garage. He can use the bike if he needs to get around. And that was it. Decision made. 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. I opened it, dish towel still in one hand. And time did that strange shutter thing where your brain tries to match the person in front of you with the last snapshot you stored of them, and fails. The freckles were still there, lightly dusted across his nose. The braces were gone. His hair was a little longer, pushed back in that effortlessly messy way that somehow looks like effort. The lanky awkwardness had settled into something else. Still young, but with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Hey, Aunt! He started, then stopped, laughing at himself. Sorry, it feels weird calling you that now. Something about the word, Aunt, made my stomach twist, not in a creepy way. Enough time has passed away. Just call me by my name, I said, smiling. The aunt part makes me feel like I should be wearing orthopedic shoes and a crocheted shawl. Okay, he grinned, and it lit his whole face. Okay, deal? Mark didn't come to the door. He shouted from his office. Tell him to dump his stuff in the spare room. I'll say hi in a bit. I'm finishing something. I repeated the message, keeping my voice light so the sting in it wouldn't leak through. I'll show you where you're staying, I said, picking up one of his bags before he could argue. "Guest room's upstairs, last door on the left." The first week was simple. He left early for his internship. Came home with stories about office politics, terrible coffee, the weird guy who always ate tuna in the break room. At dinner, he'd share the details Mark used to tell me when his job was still something that lit him up. One guy fell asleep standing up on the train. Leo said one evening while I chopped vegetables, whole crowd swaying around him. I kept waiting for him to wipe out, but he never did. I laughed, imagining it. I used to make up stories about people on the train. I admitted who they were going home to, what they were thinking, boring, happy endings. I was young. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What kind of endings would you imagine now?" he asked, half playful, half serious. I deflected, brushed it off with a joke. He let it go. For then, Mark was rarely home before dinner. When he was, his mind seemed to arrive an hour later, if at all. So the truth is, when you've been living in an emotional drought long enough, even a small trickle feels like a flood. Through one evening, my phone lit up. Working late. "Don't wait up, big project." I put it down next to the stove and stirred the sauce. Working late again. Leo asked from the kitchen table where his laptop was open. I hadn't realized he could see my screen from that angle. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Big project." He mimicked Mark's voice lightly, not cruel, just observant. "Big project. Tight deadline. You know how it is." I opened my mouth to defend my husband, to say, "He works so hard for us," or, "That's just how he is." The words turned to steam in my throat. "It's important to him," I said instead. Leo watched me for a beat. Then, quietly, he asked, "What's important to you?" The question sat there between us. I hadn't thought about it honestly in longer than I cared to admit. My days had become lists: groceries, laundry, soccer practice, bills. My wants had become background noise. I laughed it off. "I'll let you know when I remember," I said. He smiled, but his eyes were sadder than his mouth. Small moments like that kept happening. Harmless if you broke them down on paper. Dangerous if you paid attention to the spaces between the words. The night in the hallway wasn't special. No movie storm outside. No violins. Just a quiet house. Mark had gone to bed early, worn out. He'd kissed the air vaguely near my cheek and collapsed face down, out cold in minutes. I couldn't make myself follow him. My skin buzzed. My mind paced. I left the bedroom, padding toward the kitchen in my robe for a glass of water. As I rounded the corner, Leo stepped out of the bathroom. We both stopped. He was in loose shorts and a t-shirt, hair still damp. The cotton darkened at his shoulders. Nothing dramatic. A completely ordinary sight, except for the late hour, the quiet house, the way I'd been feeling lately. "Sorry," he said quickly, stepping back to let me pass. We moved at the same time to skirt around each other. The hallway wasn't that narrow, but our shoulders brushed anyway. So did our hands. It was nothing. It was everything. Clythert, the mind is cruelly efficient at replaying a single second. By morning, that tiny, unremarkable brush in the hallway had replayed on loop in my head, each time with more detail. I berated myself for being ridiculous, for letting my loneliness turn an accident into some kind of scene. So I did what I always do when my thoughts get loud. I got busy. Vacuumed rooms that didn't need it. Scrubbed counters that already shone. Reorganized the pantry like it was a life or death situation. But his presence threaded itself through every corner of the day. At one point, while I stood at the sink, he leaned on the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder. "You know you don't have to do everything, right?" he said. "You're allowed to sit down." "I'm fine," I answered quickly. "If I sit, I thought, I might not get back up. At least let me help," he said, stepping in, taking a plate from my hands. "I eat your food and use your hot water. It's the least I can do." We ended up side by side at the sink, me washing, him drying. The radio played something soft. Sun slid across the floor in long, slow rectangles. Our shoulders bumped now and then. Our hands brushed as we passed things. I could have stopped it at any point. Said, "You don't need to help. Go relax." Added the distance I knew I should keep. I didn't. Because the truth. For the first time in a long time, I liked not being alone in that kitchen. Can I ask you something? He said, towel in hand, drying the same mug twice. That depends, I said, forcing a smile. If it's about my secret recipe that I'm taking to my grave. He huffed a soft laugh, but his eyes were serious. No, just were you always this quiet? I frowned. What do you mean? I just remember you being louder, he said, at holidays. You'd make people play games after dinner. You used to be the one who got everyone laughing. You used to be bigger was what he meant. No, you just seem. He trailed off, wincing. That sounded wrong. I just mean, you look tired. I held the mug under the water a little too long. I am tired, I said lightly. He set the towel down. You know you're not invisible, right? The words landed like a stone. I didn't look up. If I feel invisible, I said, it's because that's how I'm treated. Most days I feel like furniture. Useful, but not really seen unless something breaks. Silence expanded around us. I felt his gaze on my profile, a weight and a warmth I wasn't ready for. Whoever made you feel that way, he said quietly. They're the one who's wrong, not you. I didn't answer. Couldn't, because I knew exactly who had made me feel that way. I also knew he wouldn't want to hear it. That was the problem with Leo. He didn't just notice me. He made it harder for me to ignore my own emptiness. You might be asking, why didn't I just talk to my husband? Why didn't I sit Mark down and say, I feel alone. I feel unseen. I'm fading and I need you. The truth is, I tried. Not in one dramatic speech, in small, tired attempts. Want to go out this weekend? I'd ask. Maybe next week, he'd say, never looking up from his phone. This week's crazy. He late at night staring at the ceiling. I'd murmur, I miss us. He'd roll closer just long enough to pat my hand. We're fine, he'd say. You worry too much. You can only knock at a closed door for so long before your knuckles bleed. So when Leo started listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but really listening, it felt like being handed water in a desert. You know you should sip slow. You gulp anyway. The line became clearest on a Thursday. Mark left before sunrise for a 3-day conference. Suitcase wheels clacked down the hall. He kissed my cheek, the same practiced angle he'd been using for years, and said, call if you need anything, already swiping at his screen. I will, I lied. The door shut with that soft finality that only early morning goodbyes have. The house exhaled. Leo went to his internship. I moved through the day in that strange mix of autopilot and raw awareness. When the sun began to roll down the sky, I heard the familiar sound of Leo's keys in the lock. He stepped into the kitchen, dropping his bag near the door. We ended up, again, at the sink together. Me washing, him drying. But this time, there was no mistaking the current running under the routine. You look heavy, he said, eyes on the plate in his hands. You okay? I could have lied. I'm just tired, I started. Then I heard my own voice and hated it. So I put the dish down. No, I said. I'm not. The word surprised both of us. We locked eyes. And just like that, all the pretending felt pointless. That night, after dishes and half-watched TV and him retreating to the spare room, I lay awake and played out possible futures like bad movie trailers. Run away with him. Confess everything. Burn the house down. None of them were real. What was real was that I couldn't keep carrying this alone. The next morning, I woke early. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and really looked at myself. Fine lines, a little sag here and there. A face I knew, and yet hadn't really greeted in years. I didn't pick apart flaws. I just felt sad. Sad for all the years I'd spent dimming. I went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the table gripping the mug like a talisman. I waited. Footsteps on the stairs. Leo came in, hair mussed, eyes still soft with sleep. Morning, he said, reaching for a mug. Leo, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He paused, mug halfway to the counter. Yeah, we need to talk. He set the mug down slowly. That sounds serious, he said, forcing a tiny smile. It is. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat. The kitchen was filled with that bright, unforgiving morning light that makes dust and truth harder to hide. I'm going to say some things that might be uncomfortable, I said, for both of us, but they need to be said. He nodded, jaw tight. I know we haven't done anything. I searched for the word. Physical. His ears flushed. But that doesn't mean nothing's happening. I continued. It doesn't make it harmless. I never meant to make you feel. He started. I held up a hand. This isn't about blame. You didn't break anything that wasn't already cracked. I'm the adult. I opened my heart in directions I shouldn't have instead of facing what's broken in my marriage. He stared at the tabletop. I care about you, he said quietly. More than I should, probably. And I hate seeing you hurt. That's the problem, I answered softly. You see me, and I like that too much. A silence settled over us. When I leave at the end of summer, he said slowly, I don't want this to haunt you, or ruin your marriage, or make everything weird forever. Tears stung my eyes. Then we have to choose, I said, not just drift. Choose what? To put this back where it belongs, I said. In the realm of what if, not what we did. He looked up, and the pain in his face almost undid my resolve. But what if you keep being invisible? He asked. Then that's something I have to deal with my husband, I said. Or not. But you can't be the one who fills that gap. It isn't fair. Not to you, not to me, not to him. He swallowed hard, then nodded. So what now? He asked. We'll go back to being what we're supposed to be, I said. You, my nephew, me your uncle's wife. We give each other normal. We respect the line even if our hearts keep bumping into it for a while. A small muscle in his jaw jumped. You think it's that easy? He asked. No, I admitted. I think it'll hurt, like resetting a bone that healed wrong. But I think it's the only way we don't limp through the rest of our lives. Oh, his eyes shone, but he didn't let the tears fall. I don't want to disappear from your life, he said. You won't? I said. But you can't stay in this place in it. We both know that. He stood then, slowly, chair scraping on tile. Okay, he said. Then that's what we'll do. He moved toward the sink to fill his mug. On the way, he paused, rested one hand lightly on my shoulder, a touch that, a month earlier, would have set my nerves on fire. Now, it landed like a goodbye and a blessing in one. You're not furniture, he said softly, and you never were. Then he took his coffee and left the room. The rest of the summer was gentler. We still shared space, still ate meals at the same table. But the current changed direction. He texted friends more, stayed late at his internship, laughed with the girls on the porch instead of hanging back in the kitchen with me. We'd still have moments alone in the hallway or the living room. But the looks we shared shifted from lingering to knowing. Not I want you. I'm choosing not to want you this way. When August ended, he packed his suitcase, hugged the girls, thanked us for the space. Mark clapped him on the back, told him he was proud of him, asked when he'd be back for Thanksgiving. When Leo turned to me at the door, there was a heartbeat where everything we'd almost been flashed between us. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, I replied. He stepped forward like he might hug me, then thought better of it. His hand hovered in the air for a second. Instead, he gave a tiny nod and walked out into the sunlight. I watched him go, closed the door, leant my forehead against the cool wood and exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding all summer. To today, years later, Mark and I are still here. Our marriage isn't suddenly perfect, but it's more honest. We've had ugly, necessary conversations about phones, about time, about how lonely you can feel even lying beside someone every night. He never knew the whole story about Leo and me. He did hear me, though, when I finally said, I feel invisible. He didn't change overnight, neither did I, but we both started looking up more. As for Leo, he lives in another city now. He brings a girlfriend home for holidays. A sweet woman with kind eyes who calls me by my name, not Aunt. Sometimes, across the din of Thanksgiving dinner, our eyes meet for a split second. There's a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not regret, not longing, just acknowledgement. We walked up to a line together. We looked over. We stepped back. And even if no one else ever knows, that choice is one of the things I'm most quietly proud of. If you've listened all the way through my story and felt something tug at you, If you've stood at the edge of a line no one else could see, know this: you are not terrible for craving to be seen. You are not broken for wanting to feel alive. What matters is what you do with that wanting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to leap. It's to stand at the edge, admit you almost did, and then turn back toward your life and do the hard, slow work of changing it from the inside. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, tell me in the comments. Have you ever almost crossed a line? And what made you stop? If you want more stories that live in the gray spaces we don't usually talk about, hit like, subscribe, and stay. We're just getting started.